There's a point about stigma, and there's no doubt that if it's in the local community and it's hosted by a community organisation, that any stigma of attending that community organisation is greatly reduced. But on top of that, I think it's really important to remember that when you're looking at investment in communities, not only do we want resilient children and young people, but we actually want resilient communities. So God forbid that we're faced with another epidemic at some point. But my goodness, where would we be if we didn't have that community resilience during COVID? And that community resilience of looking at the whole child, the whole family, the whole community is absolutely vital as we build back better. So it's not just focusing on the child, of allowing the child or the young person to go outside of their community. By actually holding this within neighbourhoods or wards, you're actually looking at investing in the community as a whole, and it's in that community that the child grows up. And of course, schools are also part of that community.
From Coordinate Sports, it's the Drive Phase, a show about sports founders, leaders and experts and the stories behind their business journeys. In December 2020, the Department for Education announced £220 million worth of funding for Holiday Activities and Food Programme, or HAF, designed to improve the health and well-being of disadvantaged children across England. During this special bonus episode of the podcast, we look behind the headlines to discuss the programme, which has been 8 years in the making. During our roundtable discussion, we bring together partners that have been influential in research, lobbying, delivery and support of the programme. Joining us are Professor Greta Defeyter of Northumbria University, Jane Ashworth OBE, founder and former CEO of Street Games, and Jade Harris, Head of Children, Young People and Families at ukactive. The HAF programme being funded to such an extent gives us a once-in-a-generational opportunity to create a cultural shift in society. If you're a local coordinator or delivery partner, this is a must-listen. Enjoy the show. Welcome to our virtual roundtable discussion, so slightly different format for the podcast this week. And we've got a virtual roundtable discussion all about the Holiday Activities and Food Programme. And we've assembled an expert panel to discuss the topic, and we're going to explore the origins of the programme and hopefully add some value to and context to our listeners, whether they're delivery partners or maybe local authority coordinators. So run through quick introductions of our panel. We have with us Professor Greta Defeyter of Northumbria University, and who is also the director of the Healthy Living Lab there, Jane Ashworth OBE, founder and former CEO of Street Games, and Jade Harris, head of Children, Young People and Families at ukactive. So I guess to kick off the discussion, we're going to ideally get some history and context, and as such we'll hopefully, I think maybe Greta's probably the best person to start with, given all the research that she's conducted over the years. So if you're able to kind of give us a bit of a scope of the situation, current landscape of children, families, disadvantaged in relation to the HAF programme, that'd be great.
Okay, I don't think it will be surprising to anybody that coming out of COVID-19, and hopefully we are coming out of the other side of COVID-19, that there has been significant increases in the number of children living in poverty across the whole of the UK. And specifically in England, parts of the North East and London in particular have been hard hit by rising child poverty figures. But the origins of looking at Holiday Activity and Food Programme go way back before the outbreak of COVID-19, although thanks to celebrities and footballers such as Marcus Rashford, it's been really drawn into the public consciousness over the last year. So many years ago, it's about 9 years ago now, I actually started researching what happened to children in the school holidays when they were not in receipt of free school meals, as many people will be aware, are available for families in England where the income is under 7,400 per annum for a household income. So you can see it's a very tough criteria to actually fall under. But so we were interested in the fact that during the school term, they have a hot meal provided that meets nutritional standards as in school food standards. And what happens during the other weeks of the year, so not the 39 weeks when they're in school, but the weeks when they're in holiday, what happens to these children, both in terms of their diet and potential food insecurity, but also in terms of other factors as well. So opportunities to access cultural amenities in their community, such as theatres, drama groups, swimming pools, looking at the opportunity for children to engage in physical activity, to socialise with other friends, all things that probably most of us take for granted. But if you're living in poverty, whilst they may appear free, often come with a cost. So some of our early research looked at cultural visits, for example, to the local park. And everyone would say, well, that's free, but it's not free if you have to pay for the bus to get to the park, if there's no park close to you. And also there's cultural expectations. So tester power in terms of nagging about maybe having an ice cream at the park, things that we would consider a normal practice in our culture. So we started conducting the research and we were absolutely amazed at what we found. So we found, first of all, we identified deficits in terms of summer learning loss across the holiday period, less opportunities or fewer opportunities for children to become engaged in physical activity. And at the same time, we realized that there were some communities that had already switched on to this deficit in provision and were providing holiday activities for their community members. And so we started to research what was then called holiday hunger, although it's a bit of a stigmatizing term and it's not one I particularly like. And then we came up with all kinds of research studies, and we've been researching that area full stop for the last 9 years. Last year, we combined with some of the people that are on this call today and other organizations and the Department for Work and Pensions and Department for Education, who'd already been running over the prior 3 years some pilot programs looking at a nationwide, in terms of England only, a holiday provision. So this is looking at holiday activities and food that was funded from the Department for Education. And we all came together down in Westminster last March and developed a framework for the rollout of HAF across the whole of England. And I was delighted that the DFE decided to back the scheme. It's a really good programme. And of course, this year they've rolled out funding of 220 million to all of the higher tier local authorities to deliver holiday activity and food provision for children and also for parents.
So fantastic. Thanks for the synopsis. I think a few bits to pick up on that. I mean, in terms of the funding, I know you went down to Westminster and that was secured and funded by DFE. Around that, is the amount of funding and the rollout seems it's a really big commitment from the government to back the programme. Do you feel that is that in the wake of COVID especially, or do you think that you'd probably get that back in if COVID hadn't happened as well? Good point to see.
Is that for me?
Just open to the floor. Yeah, I mean, yeah, Jane potentially might have an insight on that one.
The conversation about this work started long before COVID. If you go back to the 70s, you'll find that local authorities were running activity programs for their youngsters, for their most disadvantaged youngsters, during the summer holidays, and probably before then too. The inclusion of food in the summer provision is pretty new, although it's not entirely new. Other local authorities have done that in the past. And certainly many community groups have done that in the past. But it's only in the last few years, as Greta said, that this has become an established policy issue. COVID has made it clearer because the number of people who endure food insecurity has probably about doubled during the COVID period. But it's not only the food issue. I think what COVID has drawn to people's attention is that youngsters who are isolated in their home and who do not have stimulating things to do are particularly at risk of being fed up, being miserable, all the way along the spectrum to suffering sometimes quite profound anxiety and other forms of stress. So I think COVID has probably cemented the issue of children's wellbeing on the agenda. And I think this holiday activities issue is part of that, as well as part of the anti-poverty thinking in the country, issues about what's fair and what isn't coming to the front. So I don't think you can say it's one thing or the other thing, but I think you can say it's a cocktail.
And in terms of the pilots, it was quite an extensive pilot, multi-year pilot, various different locations. I know, Jade, you were involved, I guess, on the ground there. I mean, from a provider's point of view as well as delivery partner. What were the main finds that you saw from the pilot?
From our initial work, it's really interesting because I completely agree with Greta and Jane. This hasn't started this year or last year. This has been something that's been brewing for a longer period of time, and COVID's probably just expedited that issue and shown it in a heavier light almost.
Yeah, I think maybe in the public they might just see that big announcement, the 220 million, and as if it's come out of nowhere, obviously, if you're not working in the area.
Of course, but I think this is a much longer thing, this comes from youth centres closing, this comes from cuts to education costs. It's much bigger than just being COVID, I think, in this year. But yeah, this year has definitely highlighted the wider issue and put this at the forefront of people's minds. I think from a delivery side of thing, we at ukactive have been working on holiday clubs since 2017, when we done a report with Premier Education around how much fitness can be lost over the summer holidays, with up to 80% of fitness being lost with young people, and it falling 18 times faster for kids from low socioeconomic families. So we've been working on sort of schools as community hubs work, is what we've called it in the last few years, since 2017. And that started to sort of work with Sainsbury's and now moving on to work with sort of Nike Open Doors, HAF. What we've seen from our delivery and the work we've done is that works best is working with local people. There's no need to bus people in. There's more than enough delivery organisations locally to work with. And young people are both brilliant and brutal at the same time, which is why I love working with them so much, because they'll give you their opinion straight no matter what. And they'll call you out on it if that person doesn't fit, or they're not from their local area, or they're not someone they would hang around with or want to work with. One of the key things I think we've found with our delivery is make it local and make sure the kids lead it, the young people lead it, talk to them. They have their opinions. And a lot of the people who sit around tables like this, well, myself included, I'm far too old to be telling young people what they want now. I'm, 30. The young people know way more than I do what they want. So a lot of consultation is key, is what we've found, and working with those young people to decide what they want to be offered, because I can put a club on and tell them exactly what they want. I might not be right. The young people will always know more than I do, and they'll always be more of an expert in the room than I am. And the other thing I think is really important, and this is something I know, James, is really important to you, is what we've done throughout the past few years is really focus on that research and data piece at the end of it. What are we showcasing? What change are we trying to make with these young people? And it doesn't have to be, I've reached 12 kids for the last 12 weeks and then I'm going to disappear. It's the end route. It's what do we offer as an exit route? It's are we helping confidence? Are we changing how many kids are getting excluded? It's this kind of work. And I think they're the important things we need to be looking at. We can't just be now. And thankfully, I think we are moving away from that as a sector. We can't just be, we've reached 200 children. That's fantastic. But what have we done for those 200 children? And I think the reason our work has gone so well, thankfully, is partially due to the research we do, but also due to the fact that we're engaging with the young people first and making sure that there's exit routes for them. And there's local exit routes for them that don't need, as Greta mentioned earlier, a bus. There's no travel. There's no issue around cost. It's taking away as many of those barriers as there are.
Definitely. I think when we touch on barriers, I think we've mentioned it before about the stigma. That to me, I think that feels like a bit of a barrier. I don't know do you feel like there's maybe not an engagement issue, but more of a challenge to engage people who need to be on the programme? I don't know who I'm necessarily targeting that question at, but maybe everyone's got an opinion on that one.
It's really hard.
Yeah, we found that Street Games and other organisations that we work with closely have found that the most effective way to make sure the summer provision that you're offering does, as Jade says, connects with what young people want, but is sustainable, is where possible to make sure that provision is run by a community organisation. And that community organisation is there in that neighbourhood, come rain, come shine, whatever, for this year, for next year, for last year, and so on and so forth. So if you're able to, you never are really, but if you could pick up the model and replicate it, which of course it isn't really what happened, but if you could, it would be you'd find a community organisation that already has those excellent relationships, is its own exit route for future activity, has a funding model which means that it charges probably nothing for people to join in on, not just over the summer where it must be for nothing if they're on free school meals, and usually is nothing for other people as well, or a tiny amount of money, literally very tiny. And I have an anecdote to explain why that has to be the case later, perhaps. But an organisation that is local, is trusted, has a long life within that neighbourhood it's easier for them to attract young people and their families to take part than it is for virtually any other organisation. There are exceptions to that. I think it's often the case that a big football club with local credibility, a professional club, and probably a rugby league club along chunks of the M62 can probably outweigh that neighbourhood welly, if you like, just by the sexiness of football and rugby, if you like. But as there are not that many of them, and as there are many, many, many poorer working class neighbourhoods than can be satisfied by all those, then I think it's about community organisations. Our finding was that it's unlikely that people will travel more than a mile and a bit, and probably a bit less than a mile, actually. So that's really important, that you have something. That just reinforces the argument about neighbourhood-based provision, really. That's what I'm trying to say.
Jump in here, James, to follow what Jane is saying there. So there's a point about stigma, and there's no doubt that if it's in the local community and it's hosted by a community organisation, that any stigma of attending that community organisation is greatly reduced. But on top of that, I think it's really important to remember that when you're looking at investment in communities, not only do we want resilient children and young people, but we actually want resilient communities. So God forbid that we're faced with another epidemic at some point. But my goodness, where would we be if we didn't have that community resilience during COVID? And that community resilience of looking at the whole child, the whole family, the whole community is absolutely vital as we build back better. So it's not just focusing on the child, of allowing the child or the young person to go outside of their community. By actually holding this within neighbourhoods or wards, you're actually looking at investing in the community as a whole, and it's in that community that the child grows up. And of course, schools are also part of that community.
Yeah. In terms of the schools is a good example, I guess, because I don't know whether, I suppose it could go either way, whether there's a stigma that going to school throughout the holidays might be seen as maybe not as the right location for the programme. I don't know if that resonates. I know, Jade, you've done a lot of work with opening schools up in the school holidays and making them kind of hubs of activity. Do you find that maybe for the older children, is that a stigma to go back to school through the summer, through the whole school holiday?
Not that we've found so far. I think the key thing about schools, and this is why I think that community piece is so important, is that every family knows where their local school is, and every person knows where a local school is in their area, and they're safe spaces. They're safe spaces with good facilities most of the time. Now, opening those schools up not only gives the young people a space that they already know and they already trust, which gets away from some of those borough boundary lines or issues that are linked to crime and stuff like that. But also it gives the families a safe place where they know their young people are. So from all of the research we've done and all of the sort of speaking to young people, and this goes for pupil referral units and mainstream schools because we've worked in both, schools are not necessarily seen as a bad place to go. Children like going into some other schools that aren't always their schools, which we haven't been able to do as much during COVID times. So, you know, a lot of the kids we work with in Peru don't want to go back into the Peru, but they're more than happy to go into a local mainstream school, mainly because the facilities are sometimes better than their own Peru, or because they'll get to see something different or new. There's a lot of work we've done where even, you know, we've done comrades polling with parents, and 9 out of 10 parents have said they want the schools open. It's a safe space, it's close to home, they know where the kids are. And not only that, the schools offer a link to people they already know. They know the teachers, they know they're going back there. You can engage with the kids during term time because the teachers support to get those kids signed up for the summer holidays and those programs. It makes the most sense, in our opinion, because it is a local space, locally led, and can be accessed by all with no, yes, okay, some kids might not want to go back to school and do stuff, but they're not going back to school to do schoolwork. They're going back to school to play, to have fun, to see their friends. And with a lack of youth services and community spaces now, it's ever more important that we use these spaces, over 24,000 of them, that have amazing facilities that are on doorsteps.
Exactly. Within a mile and a half's walk, I'm assuming it's up for most children. So, yeah. Just going back to look at the pilot, and I know it'd be good probably at this stage to look at the HAF Alliance and maybe get a bit of an introduction on that. But also, we discussed around the pilot programme and that almost using the or partnering with the community organisations is best practice. But is there essentially, did you find that there's a model that should be used? There's probably two questions there. So maybe, Jane, if you want to introduce the HAF Alliance, and then we can maybe look at the research and what the pilot showed us as a good practice.
It's quite difficult to run large-scale HAF-type programmes. And the organisations that have formed the Alliance are those who are most keen to see it work well, have been there, done that, got it wrong, and are now willing to share their smarts on how to run a good programme. That's what the Alliance is for, really, to share practical tips, to collate research evidence and so on, which Greta, I'm sure, will talk about. So our ambition is for all young people and families to have healthy, active, enriching summer holidays. And that breaks down in terms of an hour a day physical activity, a good, decent, nutritious meal at school food standards, opportunities to muck about with your mates in age-appropriate settings, and so on and so forth. So that's the purpose of the Alliance. The organisations that have got involved are specialists in one or other of the component parts, the essential fields, if you like, of a good summer programme. So you've got, for instance, FareShare, who are experts in sourcing reduced costs within date food. You've got Feeding Britain, which is the national network of organisations and individuals keenest on combating food poverty. We've got local authorities, which have achieved as far as anyone's achieved in providing a citywide, if you like, offer for the most deprived kids over the summer holidays. And the numbers go on. Street Games, obviously, in active partnerships, their expertise is in physical activity in a fun manner, because the last thing we want, and I'm sure very few people have done this, is apart from possibly for dedicated sports camps for older people, for older youth, the last thing you want is 6-year-olds, 7-year-olds spending all their time in a game of five-a-side or something. They should be doing many, many more types of physical activity. So you've got all those kinds of organisations and people who are committed and serious to it, who are willing to share their ideas. So in a way, it's a very small thing that the HAF Alliance offers, but in another way, it's very big, because we're aware that we mustn't let this opportunity slip through our fingers. This is a possibility of making an absolutely major change to the life landscape of thousands upon thousands of disadvantaged families. And to let that trickle through our hands through not taking every opportunity we can find to make the programme, the pilots, better would be a terrible waste. In a way, this is an astonishing opportunity. I can't think of much else that's happened in the last, quite a while really, that could make such a difference to so many people in such a positive way. Well, that's why the HAF Alliance exists.
And I mean, Greta, I don't know if you want to pick up there in terms of, I guess, best practice, really. For us, I know there's a lot, and we get feedback from our partners directly, and Jade probably as well, with the network of providers. And also, I feel a bit for the coordinators, like Jade touched on cutbacks, and there's that provision or that network might not be in place, but then suddenly the funding's come in, and it's maybe 10 times the normal funding that the local authority would have, with the same, I guess, or maybe shorter time scale to get that in place and build out a network, things like that. And local authority partners have got their day jobs to do as well, I suppose. So is there a kind of a best practice model or something that they could work to? I know there's loads of resources on the HAF Alliance site, and we'll link all that into the show notes, but from your point of view, is there kind of best practice steps to take?
Sure. So in terms of models, many years ago now, my lab looked at what kind of dose, so how many times do children have to attend and for how long, and the reach of how many children need to attend, to start making differences in terms of some of the key outcomes that we would want HAF to drive forward. So if you think about things like providing childcare, educational attainment loss, downtrend in terms of engagement and physical activity, mental health and well-being, social isolation, dietary intake. So there's lots of outcomes. And I think that's the unique thing about HAF, is it doesn't offer just one or two outcome measures. It offers outcome measures in terms of physical activity, social outcomes, so reduction of loneliness, increased friendship, resilient communities through networking, better parental mental well-being. So we've got evidence that it reduces parental stress, helps in them developing friendship, improves mental well-being in parents, helps them with their social isolation, educational attainment. I could go on and on, all right? So when we're looking at a model like this, it's not simple. It's a very complex type of model. So I think it's probably in the last 20 years of conducting research in these areas, this is the best type of program I've seen for having the reach and ability to drive so many positive outcomes in terms of children, young people, parents, communities, and also the economy of the actual country, right? So if you're thinking about childcare costs, which may be prohibitive and stop parents working across the summer, the fact that those parents can utilize HAF and stay and work drives the economy, okay, in terms of human capital. So when we looked at all of these factors, the model that we found at that stage for optimum return against all of these outcome measures was what we called a 4x4x4 model. So that was just initially focusing on the summer. And it was saying that children have to attend a minimum of 4 days per week for 4 hours a day across 4 weeks of the summer. And that was the starting point. Since then, we've actually, as clubs have developed and they've evolved as young people have fed into what they want in the club. That club model that started off as quite basic has actually evolved now. I'm really pleased to see that the Department for Education is now looking at provision over Easter and Christmas, because those holidays are important too. So in terms of when you then look at a model in terms of delivery site, so whether one of the questions I get asked a lot is it better to deliver it in a community centre, on a playing field, at a school? Where is the best place? And the simple answer to that is the best place is the best placed in the community. That's it. When I analyze data, and this is, large data sets, it doesn't seem to make any difference of whether you have the activities, St. James's Park, Newcastle United, or Sunderland Stadium of Light, or we have it in a school, or we have it in a church hall. What matters is that the community and the children and young people attending think it's the best place. And that's the key, okay? So when we look at, the wider place-based agenda of how to invest in communities, it's different across each ward and across each neighbourhood. And we shouldn't be prescriptive in that. So yes, whilst I agree, if there's an opportunity to use public buildings, such as opening up schools across the summer holidays, fantastic. But it doesn't necessarily have to be a school. I've seen some wonderful projects run on universities. We ran a trial project last year. I've seen projects run in libraries. I've seen projects in parks. We have to make use of the existing resources in the communities. And I think the important thing that we need to think about, if we have the holiday provision in the right place, so to speak, for the young people and the children that attend, and also the parents, then those children and young people will attend the club. And it's via attendance that we drive the outcomes, both at the individual, the household or family level, and also the community level, that are so positive for all of those involved.
Just to follow up on that one, the 4x4x4 model, I know there needs to be a criteria around how a matrix of funding and how things are calculated. Is that to be used literally, or is it open for interpretation in terms of how a local authority or how someone would like to use their funding for the best abilities? If that makes sense, because I know that's a query out in the network at the moment.
Yeah. So when we look at a 4x4x4 model, that is what we're looking at in terms of driving the optimal outcome. So it's the minimum amount across a ward or local authority. So you can have variation within that model. So it could be, for example, that one holiday club can only deliver for 2 days during the summer holiday. That's absolutely fine. What I would say to local authorities is also look at other provision, for example, an alternative holiday club that those children could also attend, because it's a bit like, put it, and I don't mean to be patronizing when I say this, but it's kind of like a bit like myself, right? So I signed up for Slimming World and I went twice and I didn't lose much weight, but it's hardly surprising, right? I went twice and I thought, I can't do this very well at all. So I gave up. And so that's what I'm talking about in terms of reach and dose. So to have the optimal outcomes for children and young people, which is what we're trying to achieve, you have to actually make sure that you've got provision that provides at least the opportunity for those young people to engage. And I've seen local authorities where maybe, for example, a church hall can only deliver 2 days a week, but then they have alternative arrangements in place as well for those children to attend. And what I would say to local authorities and coordinators that are doing this is, when I look at the expertise and the HAF Alliance, is not to be daunted by that. Actually use the expertise, because these guys have done it, seen there, been there, bought the T-shirt. But when they started out, and I'll say this with Jane on the call, we all made mistakes. They made mistakes in terms of delivery. I made mistakes in terms of what we're researching. So it's a journey. I'd say to local authorities, don't expect it to be perfect in year one. But if you read the research and you read the case studies and you see the positive outcomes, you can see actually this is worthwhile investing in for the longer term.
I think Greta's right about that. And I think the stuff that's hardest to get right, it's quite simple to draw a map and decide you need to do something here, there, and over there, and a bit over there too. And it's much harder to start with the conversation with parents or older young people about where they want their provision to be, what it should look like. Do the young youth, like the teenagers, are they prepared to mix with 8-year-olds? Because the answer could well be no, but it might be yes. And whether or not you can get yourself a generation of young leaders coming through, because that's what they really fancy doing, is organising the younger ones. It's the quality of conversation that you can have with the beneficiaries that will really allow the summer programme to sing, I think. But that takes a while. And where the local authority has already got a great relationship with the community sector, let's call it as a whole. So I'm talking their residents, small community groups, and more established voluntary sector organisations. That conversation is already happening in a different form. Where that conversation isn't so good, then it's harder for the local authority to start to, converse with the people you hope to be your beneficiaries. And I think talking to some people, as Greta said, who really messed it up first time or developed a rescue package on how to not make it quite so bad halfway through the first time, and critical in-flight adjustments might well be really handy. And of course, as all the organisations are very keen on their subject, and that's why they've joined up to the HAF Alliance, they're terribly willing to share that information. So I can tell you terrible stories about me personally overestimating the stickiness of kids to their local project. God knows how I made the mistakes that I did, but I really did, I really did think they were going to be coming far more often than they did. I absolutely failed to understand how many years, actually, how many summers it's going to take for it to become, that's what you do on that estate. You go to that over the summer. And I knew that from having done 30 years working in the similar context. And that was my particularly gross error. Another one that might be handy for people to avoid is a story about, it was before all this blew up as a national HAF and DFE funding and so on. It was the first year of it, actually. Yeah, the first year of it. I was working with some community deliverers, I think it was in Merthyr Tydfil, and they worked out that in order to make their project work best and to have enough money and resources to keep going for, I think it was every day in the summer holidays, they decided they were going to put on a minimum charge. No, a maximum charge, a charge. And that charge was going to be, I think, 50p a day. And at the end, and these were very experienced community organisers from the sports sector, but they really knew what they were doing. Community sport type, play, fun, physical activity sector. They really knew what they were doing and they were well embedded in their neighbourhood. They worked on the assumption that 50p a day would be fine. And at the end of the first week, one of the workers, again, very experienced worker, you would pay your bottom dollar to get this guy to come and work for you. He really knows what he's doing. And he goes up to two lads, probably let's go for 7 and 9, and says to them, did you enjoy it then? You've done your full week. What did you make of it? Are you coming back next week? And they said, I won't try and do a Welsh accent because I'll offend somebody. And they said, yeah, they thought it was lovely. It was fantastic. They'd been swimming. They'd been for a walk in the park. They'd had plenty of games of rugby and five-a-side. They'd done a nice cutty-outy, sticky-downy thing they'd taken home to their mum. They'd made a pizza. They could reel off the list of fantastic things they'd done, and they were wide-eyed and buzzy with the excitement of it. And the worker says, well, good then. Shall I see you again on Monday? I'm glad you enjoyed it, lads. And they said, no, we can't come next week. It was 50p each per day. So Mum was able to pay for that because she used our birthday money. So we can't come next week. Now, that is just hideous, isn't it? It's a hideous mistake for us all to have been involved in making, to work on the assumption that a family could afford £1 a day to keep their children nourished in every way you could imagine. Food-wise, activity-wise, intellectually, emotionally, and so on and so forth. So that's actually the living context of many people that we're working with. And really, the HAF Alliance are the people who with all due respect to others who are yet to join us, who have considerable expertise in supporting those families to make positive decisions for themselves, and critically, as Greta said at the start, to make positive decisions about improving the quality of life in their neighbourhood and their community.
Definitely. I think, does that raise a question around, I guess, with the scale of the programme, does that raise a question around capacity, Jade? I know you work with obviously a massive network of providers, but the capacity of providers, but also there may be experience and the skill to deal with, like that anecdote there, or skill to deal with certain situations or to know how to approach them. And I know looking at this capacity in terms of volume, but also in terms of skills. I don't know if there's any training. Is there any training associated with providers joining the programme, and how does that sit?
Well, I think interestingly, and I say this from our experience anyway, is every single club, whether it's one borough away from another HAF programme or 2,000 miles away, is slightly different, and they all have their different needs, skill sets, but the local delivery is different too. So I wouldn't agree that there's an issue with not having enough delivery partners on the ground. I think, if anything, everything I've seen so far from local providers and delivery agents they're chomping at the bit to be involved in stuff like HAF, which is amazing because it shows that not only is it needed on the ground, but the network want to deliver it and they want to be involved with this. On the skill set piece, I think it's more of a case of listening to stuff like James speaking about now, lessons learned of what has worked and what hasn't worked. The reality of it is, with any delivery and any sports development, older terminology here, sports development, physical activity development work, is there will be lessons learned in everything we do. So even with all of the delivery of HAF this summer, I don't expect it to be everyone going, okay, we've learned everything we needed to learn and every programme went well. I do expect that this year, when Jane and the team look back, they'll go, okay, this worked here, but it didn't work here. Why? I think that's going to happen across the board. And I think even in programmes we deliver and stuff we've worked on for the past 2 years, we look at it and go, okay, why didn't it work in October half term, but it worked in the summer? What do we need to change? What do we need to do? What I would say is, this is something ukactive has been working on with the Active Partnerships Network and Sport England recently, is we have been helping create a template for how we've done delivery before and what we've done. So we have worked around and said, look, this is the kind of contracts we're using. These are the assessments we're using in schools. This is how we talk to the schools to engage them and say, look, this is why other schools have got involved. Would you be interested? I think the one thing I'll keep advocating for is it has to be a joint venture. Any community setting, any school, and anyone who wants to do, they have to want to deliver this. If they don't want to deliver it, there's no point putting it in there, because it has to be a joint venture to make this the most successful piece of work it can be, because it hits so many different areas of social integration, food, health, activity. In order to do that and in order to have the most impact, everyone has to be on board. Do I think there is a lack of desire to do it? No way at all. In my opinion, there's more and more people coming forward every week from our membership saying, how do I get involved? What do I do? Who should I speak to? From both Sport England's side, who are doing work with the Active Partnership Network, and for the DFE HAF staff. My inbox is filled weekly with me trying to place them with the right people or the right councils saying, okay, you need to speak to this person in the London Borough of Tower Hamlets. Oh, okay, you're in Hull, you need to speak to this person. So yeah, I don't think there is an issue of possibly not having that. I think if anything, you're going to have the issue of how do I do as much as the communities want to do, because I think everyone understands the importance of this work. So yeah, there's definitely not an issue of less people doing stuff or not enough people to do stuff, should I say.
In terms of the, looking back at the funding and all of the kind of additional benefits, really, so it's almost like for the government, it's pretty good value for money, I guess, with the additional impact that it can make across all different verticals. I know one kind of trend that we've been seeing is maybe for someone just stepping into this role, it's a bit of pressure in terms of a huge budget, short timeline, and almost maybe, that was my question before around, is it open to interpretation? They're maybe sticking to the guidelines really rigidly and maybe discussing around how to not restrict access, but like once it gets to 16 hours, that's enough for that child. Is that a stipulation of the funding, or is that kind of, if a child accessed more than 16 hours, is that an issue? I guess that's something to maybe, if anyone knows how to clarify that, it would be good. Potentially, Greta, I don't know if you've got a take on that one.
I think my advice would be to local authorities is, I think this year, for those local authorities that haven't delivered before, it is a bit of a test and learn. I think that's fair in terms of the community engagement, but also in terms of the local authority, because as Jade has already said, these programs are complex. So you're looking at making sure that food complies to school food standards. you're looking at making sure that you've got at least 1 hour moderate vigorous physical activity per day. You're trying to ensure that the educational sessions are there not only to support children, but also parents in terms of cooking skills, enjoying time together, looking at building resilience. And so what I would advise, my top tip for local authorities, is to concentrate on the quality of the provision whilst trying to maintain that breadth that I talked about in the model. And I think that there are various ways that you can do this at a local authority. I think that if I was sitting in a local authority, and I'm not, I'm a researcher, so I'm probably coming at it from a slightly different angle. But I think one of the key things here is to really utilize your monitoring and mapping data. So the Department for Education have asked people and local authorities to map the provision against the need. And that's important. And it shouldn't just be sitting there as, right, I've done that, I've ticked the box, because what that mapping does is it enables local authorities to identify where the need is greatest within their funding allocation. And also then to look at other community organisations that are delivering provision in that area to ensure that the need is met. But of course, when you're looking at mapping, you may find an area that maybe only has a few children on free school meals, but actually in terms of percentage in that population, it could be a high percentage. So you've got to look at count in terms of the number of children, but also the percentage of children in that population that are on free school meals. So use the mapping data to inform your practice. And likewise, when you're looking at the monitoring data, monitor your attendance, monitor your sign up, look to see where clubs are oversubscribed, undersubscribed, so that you're using real-time data to inform your practice. And that will help local authorities to maximize their funding allocation in terms of delivery outcomes.
So I just want to be respectful for everyone's time, but I do have one final question, and I'll pass to, it's just on mute, Jay. Sorry, Jane.
Yeah, I think all those points that Greta's made are right. And in order for a local authority to feel secure that it's making the best fist of it can, we found that a training needs analysis of all the possible providers who are going to be funded through a grant regime or some other investment strategy that local authorities adopted is really important, because you carry out the training needs analysis, you're quite clear that no one's expecting anybody to be already fantastic and able to get up and run. But during those training sessions, of course, you'll make sure everyone's up to scratch with safeguarding standards. Of course, you'll make sure that all the organisations have got their food hygiene level 2 certificates. Of course, you'll make sure that everyone's got a good stack of ideas of how to keep 9-year-olds running around, including the ones who don't want to. And that sort of skill box, if you like. But you'll also, if you're lucky, with a fair wind, I think you can expect to find that you can build a camaraderie of those organisations that are going to be delivering. We live in a world, don't we, where organisations are competing for money to deliver activities. This is different, really. I found that this is different. I found that it's fantastic to create opportunities where divide your neighbour, your city or whatever it is, into 6 or whatever it is. You pull together those organisations that operate in that patch, and you've got a fair chance that they will collaboratively agree which activities should be going on where and when between them, because they are committed in their DNA to improving the quality of life in their neighbourhoods. So they shouldn't be seen as competitors. They should be seen as organisations that want to work together. And of course, if you pull people together like that, not only do you strengthen those community organisations and those communities, not only do you have a better interwoven jigsaw, or whatever the word would be, of provision for the summer, but you also get the chance to do really big things together. Now, we were unable to do that because of COVID, really. But for instance, in Newcastle upon Tyne, more or less everybody can get to the beach in their organised party from their community provider, and you can have a fantastic day out en masse on the beach or in a central park, or have a big fun sports festival or arts festival or whatever it is, so that the youngsters get to experience something en masse that they would never go anywhere near in other circumstances, and it can only be organised by the collective of providers and their hub coordinator. So there are so many things that can be done if you empower the community organisations that are doing the delivery to have wings, as it were.
In terms of sustainability and success, I guess is my final question. I know I want to be respectful of everyone's time, and I just want to see, what does that look like for everyone in terms of, maybe start with yourself, Jade, but what would successful HAF program look like for 2021?
Well, I think the fact, one, let me put out there first, the fact that there is this amount of funding across such a wide area, it will be a success anyway, because we will learn so much in our sector this year of what works and what doesn't, and we'll reach so many young people. That in itself will be successful. What would success look like in 2021? I'd love for this year to be delivered so well, and for so many different types or styles of activity to be delivered in different ways, that it becomes unheard of not to have holiday activity and food work happening until we don't need it anymore, which is the dream, right? The dream is we don't need that anymore. But until that point, I think the idea of this year is pilot it, learn lessons, work out what works, take those successes and keep them going for next year. But ultimately, it's make this normal. You know, we talk about breakfast clubs 10 years ago. That was like, we're going to put a breakfast club in a school. We're going to put one here because it needs it. Now breakfast clubs are a social norm in most schools because they're needed and they're useful. I feel like the way we should be moving is that summer like this is the social norm. How do we engage our young people, keep them safe, keep them active and help them? If HAF can make this the social norm, that's the end goal for me. I think that would be the ultimate dream, as we say. But yeah, I think this year's learning lessons, taking them on and working out how we further it for next year. You know,
definitely setting the foundations for that culture change, I think.
Yeah. Just on quickly on the wider part, then I guess this year, cheekily, I'd want to see private investment support as well. So not only local government, I'd want to see the likes of
from the food producers and people like that, the supermarkets or something.
Absolutely. And we saw Sainsbury's a few years ago put on a programme with Active Kids Club. This year, we are working with UK Active to run some programmes this summer. I think there needs to be, I'd like to see a half-half, somewhere in the middle where we get that wider support so that CSR work is going into helping those young people across what Greta and Jane have spoke about, a broad range here, because you do help on many levels. So that's what I'd like to see long-term. There's the vision, but hopefully we won't need them in 10 years' time. But yeah.
Greta, do you have an opinion on sustainability, I guess, as well for the programme moving forward? You've done so much research over the years, I guess we'll get to a point. I don't know if this was your end goal when you put the research together, probably just a starting point, I guess. Yeah.
Okay, so I was involved in some of the original Breakfast Club research in the UK, and I've worked with Greg and Kellogg and other organisations to look at breakfast clubs. And Jade is exactly right. It's now become almost normative for schools to have a school breakfast club. And I think that I'd probably disagree slightly with Jade in that I would say in 10 years' time, I would actually like to see HAF universal and in every community across the UK. Because I think what we need to do is we need to change our conception of what HAF is about. If we just look at it as a poverty alleviation measure, then it will change as poverty changes. But poverty has been around for a long time. And the first incidence actually in Parliament of holiday hunger was in 1906. So I'm probably going to be dead and gone before my dream is realised. I think, though, that we have to look at society, and now is the time to look at our society as we build back better or build back fairer. And I think that once HAF becomes normalised and integrated in communities, then my question would be, why shouldn't we have a programme of activities and food associated with that for all young people? Because if we're really talking about investing in our young people, we would have to really totally readjust our economy in terms of enabling parents to pay for childcare for 2 to 3 children, perhaps over the summer period. So I think it should become a normalised thing. If you look at somewhere like Sweden, Sweden has holiday provision. It's just normalised. That's where children go. That's how they spend their holiday, in a safe environment within their community, learning skills. We're investing in young people, so that human capital into young people, or maybe, as Jane would like to say, sporting capital into young people. These are essential attributes that we want in our children and young people. So I would say this, that so to every Sainsbury's, Tesco, Morrison, sporting Premier League football. You can see I'm not a sports person at all, but I hope you get my information, the information I'm trying to put across, is step up to the plate, match the government funding. Let's give every opportunity to every young child and young person the opportunity to engage in HAF in a meaningful way. It shouldn't be seen as just a poverty alleviation measure. This is something that we should invest in our young children. We invest in our schools. Why on earth, for nearly 15, 17 weeks of the year, we actually don't invest in our young people? It's just beyond me. And so I think that actually we should really look at this just as we have school breakfast clubs and make this a normative part of society.
Yeah, just going to go back to Jade on that one. I'm even going to respond on that.
No, I absolutely agree. I think the idea was you don't need it just to be clear, we don't need it just for the fact of helping families in poverty. The idea is this becomes a social norm and something natural to do because it's fun to do and because kids want to do it and because it makes sense. Completely agree, to be clear. But yeah, I love that call out. I think we need to talk to Kellogg's and sporting brands and everyone else in the world to actually co-jointly fund it going forwards, because if kids make active adults, right? And that's what we all want in life, But yeah, I could not agree more.
I'm just gonna go to you, Jane, just to close the show. But in terms of, I know you've done so much work in the community and building up community organisation, delivery partners, and that sustainability. Are we saying that HAF maybe isn't sustainable unless the funding's there? So this funding needs to continue. It's not something that could run without it.
Well, I don't. This is too big and too important, but critically too big to be funded by the policy instincts of large companies. At the moment, many companies are being fantastic in supporting this work. So are many charities like Pears Foundation, the Childhood Trust. They're all contributing to our capacity as street games, for instance, to do this kind of work. And it's very important. But this is a matter that needs spreading. The provision needs to be universalised. It needs to be available wherever you live. It needs to be available wherever you live as a right. So therefore, it can't be left to individuals or to corporate bodies to decide to pay for it. This is what governments are supposed to do. They are supposed to make life better. And one way of making life better will be to improve the quality of the summer landscape, primarily the summer landscape, but not exclusively, for very many young children, young people really. And the sooner it becomes established that that's one of the things that the British state does, then the better, as far as I can see. Lovely to get top up from other organisations. Absolutely fantastic. Fantastic to get opportunities funded by other organisations to do things that you wouldn't normally be able to do on government funding. I get all that. I'm happy with all that. Let's not be frightened of saying this is a taxation question. Taxes should be used to pay for improving the summer landscape and the rest of the holiday landscapes too.
Thank you so much for everyone giving up their time. I know that we're going to link in all the resources we've discussed, but any local authority or any provider looking for support, looking for those lessons learned, I'd say go over to the HAF Alliance website and check that out, try and engage there. And then obviously any provider, I know Jade got a full inbox at the moment, but we'll try and fill that up even more with other providers, anyone who wants to get involved. And yeah, I just want to say thank you very much for all of your time, guys. Thank you for listening to this week's show. You can subscribe anywhere you get your podcasts. If you'd like to get in touch with us, you can write to us at dryphase.podcast@coordinate.cloud, tweet us at coordinatesport, or follow us on Instagram at coordinate_sports, or on my account at James_Ventures. This episode was produced by Nancy Kwamboka, with support from Claire Goodchild and Lola Small, with special thanks to Rochelle. I'm James Moore, and you've been listening to The Drive Phase from Coordinate Sport.